God has for you to learn today? Well, we are going to talk about a story that really isn't that familiar, I don't think. It's not one that we often hear from the Old Testament. So if you think, yeah, I've heard that story before, you might just want to listen up today. And you may have, boys and girls. I'm not saying no one's heard of it, but I know when I was studying it, it was one I had to study a little bit more than some of the others that are more familiar. Well, we started at the beginning of Genesis, and we are now in chapter number 26. So if you have your Bible and you want to turn to chapter 26, you can. Okay, we talked about Adam and Eve, and we moved on to Noah, and we moved on to Abraham, and we talked about Lot, and then we talked about Abraham's son Isaac. And Isaac had 2 sons. If you remember, we talked last week about how their mom was pregnant with them, and it was like they were fighting in her stomach, and she was so confused by the way that felt. And then she had twins, and it kind of made more sense. Well, we talked about the fact that both Isaac and his wife had a favorite child. Boys and girls, that isn't what God had planned. Okay, we talked about how Jacob was the favorite of his mother, and how Jacob, we also talked about, yeah, that's right. That's exactly where I was going, Peter. Jacob had tricked his brother into trading him his birthright. Do you remember what he traded for the birthright? Can you think of that, boys and girls? What? That's right. He traded food for the birthright. He was so hungry. He said, what good does a birthright do me if I die? Well, Isaac is raising his 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, and there is a famine in the land. What's a famine? A famine. It's not good. That's right. It's not good. It's the idea, boys and girls, that they haven't had rain, so the crops haven't been able to grow, and they are running out of food. There is very little food to eat. Well, Isaac starts to get concerned for his family and is like, what am I going to do? God has promised to bless us. What can I do if there's no food in my land? No food where he's living. What can he do? You're right, Peter, he can move. So he prays, and God tells him to move to a city of Gerar. Not completely sure of the pronunciation, but that's what we're going with. Maybe Peter can pronounce it better than I can. But he says he's going to go to Gerar, and that is where the Philistines live. And the king Abimelech is there. Well, Abraham had been there at one point as well and had digged wells. We keep throwing out these terms. Boys and girls, I don't think any of you had to get up this morning and go out to a well to get water out of it. Yeah, I don't think so. I have a, not my great grandma, but a relative, who still chooses to live on a farm with no running water. So she lives in Wisconsin, Aunt Harriet, she does still have to go out and get water. But boys and girls, most of us went to the sink this morning, turned it on, and we had water, okay? But for Isaac, yes, Peter? Does she have animals? She does. She lives on a farm. Peter's just making a point that I have a relative who lives on a farm. Anyways, the wells. Anyways, Abraham had been there before. They had dug some wells in this area. So this was a place that Isaac was likely familiar with, or at least knew about. Well, Isaac travels there, and God tells him he's going to bless him, and he does. In that first year, God multiplies what Isaac has. He has more sheep, more cattle, more anything. Everything that he had, God had blessed and multiplied it. Well, the king there, Abimelech, he's like, do you guys see that guy who's living in our land? He's getting pretty wealthy. He's getting a lot of things. And the king starts to get a little nervous, starts to get a little worked up. He's like, wait a minute, he has all this wealth. What are we going to do about it? He thinks he's becoming too powerful for us. So the king Abimelech goes to Isaac and he says, Isaac, he asks him to leave. He says, you're getting too powerful for here. Well, the city of Gerar was basically located in a larger region that had a valley. At first I read it and I was like, wait, he moved from Gerar to Gerar, and I was very confused. So I had to go back and reread the passage. Basically, he moved from the city and went out into the valley, or the bigger area, the broader region. Well, he goes out there and he tells his herdsmen, those who are taking care of his cattle, and he says, that I know my dad had wells here. We need to find them because the Philistines have filled them in with dirt. And back in those days, boys and girls, if you had a well on a piece of property, that meant you owned the property. So if you dug a well there, it was yours. You got to stay there. A little different than our society. I don't think your neighbors would appreciate if you went next door, dug a hole, and then claimed that that land was yours. Probably not going to go too well for you, but that's how it was for them. So David, I'm sorry, boys and girls, not David, Isaac's herdsmen went out and they dug up a well. They found one of the wells and they dug it up so that way they could get the water out of it. And we have a well back here. Well, there were some Philistines who took care of their own cattle and sheep, and they're like, wait a minute. You can't take and dig up that well. You can't be here. There won't be enough for our sheep and for your sheep. And Isaac's like, it's kind of normal practice. But Isaac thought, you know what? I want to keep the peace. I don't want to start a fight. I don't want to start an argument. I don't want to be a part of it. So he says, that's all right. He tells his herdsmen, he's like, I know my dad dug more than one well. We will just find another well. So sure enough, boys and girls, they go and they find a second well. Again, they have to dig the dirt out of it so that they can get to the water. They get to the water and it's like, same song, second verse. The Philistines are like, nope, can't be here. We want this land. We want this well. We own, and they're just going after Isaac again. And the Philistines said, we will fight you for it. We will have an argument. We will fight to get this back from you. And Isaac's like, nope, not worth it. I'm not going to fight. I'm going to keep the peace. I'm not going to fight you for it. So he goes to a third well. And the Bible does tell us that when he went to the third well, that the Philistines no longer argued with him. They let him stay there, and his family continued to grow. God continued to bless. He continued to provide them with more and more things. So there was a famine in the land, boys and girls, and God still took care of Isaac. There's a promise that we've mentioned over and over, a promise that God made to Abraham, and then it carried on to Isaac. And do you remember what that promise was? This is pretty important. It's going to follow. It's like following a thread. We're following this through. The promise was he was going to have many, many children. He was going to have lots and lots of children, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Well, if that promise is going to take place, they can't die from a famine and a lack of food. God's going to provide for them, and he does. He has them move to Gerar. Well, and then Isaac faces the Philistines and he decides to keep the peace, but he keeps moving around. God provided yet another well. He provided 3 wells so that Isaac could have somewhere to live with his family. God was taking care of him. Boys and girls, in Genesis chapter 26, verse number 24, it says, And the Lord appeared unto him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and I will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. And he builded an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. Okay, so God promises he's going to multiply. He is going to bless, and he does just that. But boys and girls, it was important for Isaac to keep the peace. Okay, how many times have your brothers or sisters done something that's annoying? Like if I stood here and tapped Peter over and over, it would get annoying. How many times have your brothers and sisters done something just so you would react? Okay, our brother or our friends. Our brothers and sisters or our friends will do things that they know will make us react. Boys and girls, I have a class of 18 sixth graders. They know, especially the boys, know what bothers the girls. And they will do that to get a reaction out of the girls. It doesn't always go that way, but that's the typical case. Will you keep the peace, boys and girls, the next time a classmate, a friend, a brother, a sister does something just to annoy you? Will you keep the peace or will you fight back? Will you slap them? Will you hit them? Or will you keep the peace? Our lesson today, boys and girls, is to remind us the importance of keeping the peace, and God promised to bless Isaac because he did what God had asked him to do. Have a great day, boys and girls.